Welcome to toy-polloi. No Legos were harmed in the making of this video.
Hello and welcome to another video from toy-polloi, and today we're going to be looking at repairing these two vintage Popy Gatchaman Battle of the Planets figures. We have Tiny and we have Mark from Battle of the Planets. Now these were recently sent to me very kindly by Evander, who is a Patreon of mine. He knows that I really like the Gatchaman and Battle of the Planets toys. They are incredibly hard to find, so it's really kind of him to send these over to me. Popy is a Japanese company, but these were released under another sort of brand name in France, and they're from about sort of 1979, 1980, and as you can see, they don't actually look too bad considering how old they are. There are a few issues, which is what I want to fix today, because at the moment they're not really displayable. Mark is not too bad condition. He's obviously missing his mask, he's also missing the cape, and he's a little bit sort of loose and floppy, but otherwise, apart from a bit of dirt and some paint wear, he's not too bad. So I will take him apart and give him a bit of a clean, maybe try and tighten up his legs if I can. I'm not going to bother sort of touching up the paint because these are pretty rare figures. I want to leave them as is, but I do want to make him a cape if I can. But poor old Tiny has suffered a few issues. At some point it looks like his legs have broken off, and I'm going to say a child or something has glued them back in place, so we need to work out a way to reattach those, and he also needs a pretty good clean. But I can use his cape to make a cape for Mark, because I've been checking some images online and it looks like all of the sort of larger male characters use the same cape pattern, so I can take this off and make a pattern from it. But we need to work out how to repair his legs. If we look at Mark, you can see his legs look like they're sort of constructed very similar to G.I. Joe, so maybe there's a T-bar inside because they've got a lot of motion, so there's definitely a ball joint in the hip there. But until I open one up and see, I can't actually say how this is constructed. So it may be that we can easily fix this. It may be there's a few issues. I'm hoping that we could just use a G.I. Joe replacement T-bar, but yeah, until I open it up, not quite sure. So let's open these figures up and we'll see how they are constructed, and then we can work out how to fix them. So I'm going to start by taking Mark apart because he is unbroken, and I'm hoping that that will then give me some ideas as to how the Tiny figure is fixed and why it's being glued in the way it has been glued. It also looks like to get the cape on we need to take them apart anyway, because you can see that the cape is actually sort of held on by the head. There's obviously two holes through the cape and it's all put together in one piece, so you can't remove the cape without taking the figure apart. So let's take Mark apart and see how he is constructed. So it's just one screw on the back. It does seem incredibly like a G.I. Joe figure, so I'm hoping it will be the same sort of construction, but as I say, this is the first time I've looked inside, so we'll see what it is. Oh, well, there you go. Look, it's sort of like a G.I. Joe figure, but it's got the same sort of construction on the body. We've got loose arms and a head, but that T-bar is made out of plastic. It looks like a single piece of plastic. I'm guessing there's ball joints on either end. That's quite interesting. It's certainly, you know, they've taken the same idea. Maybe they used the G.I. Joe figure as a sort of basis. Can we remove that piece? Does it unclip? Oh, it does. I can feel that moving. So if we can take that off, I can then have a look at it fully, and we'll possibly be able to recreate it if the Tiny one is broken, which I think it most likely is. All right, yeah, so it is essentially a T-bar, but just made out of plastic. It's the same sort of construction. That's good. It sort of gives me a good idea of what to expect. So let's open up Tiny and we'll see what he looks like and see what the damage is like inside, and then we can go about trying to remove the glue and making something new. That's the screw out. I would guess that it's going to be glued together at the bottom, so we might have to break this apart using something. So I might get a knife or something in there and see if we can sort of get his body apart. I'm just going to remove that leg because that's only just held on with a tiny amount of glue now, it looks like. Oh no, maybe there's a bit of string or something there. It looks like a bit of thread. I'm going to have to get a knife and cut that. Yeah, that looks like it's got thread going around it. How weird. Not quite sure how that has been repaired. Let me get a knife and we'll cut that, and then we can see if we can yeah, get this figure apart. Okay, so I've got him apart. The cape came off nice and easy. That's pretty useful because, as I say, we can make a pattern from that. I can just scan that in on a flatbed scanner and make a pattern, and we can cut that out of some other plastic material. It's a sort of strangely textured material, but I think just a bit of a blow-up beach ball or something will do the job. Mark's one should be white, so that should be quite straightforward to do. But the legs were really strangely repaired. There's bits of glue, there's bits of sticky tape, and there's also bits of this sort of clear thread that have been wrapped around, and then sort of that's been glued on top of it. You can see the thread here on his leg. It's very strangely done. I'm not quite sure how they were thinking to sort of fix this. So I can take most of that off, and then the glue is pretty well stuck on. I'm not quite sure what that glue is, so I'm going to have to try and carefully remove as much of that as I can and leave the plastic sort of in as reasonable condition as possible. But then, yeah, the whole of the connecting piece, the little sort of T-bar piece that we have on this Mark 1 is busted, so I'm going to have to make that from scratch, or see if I can modify a G.I. Joe T-bar and connect that in some way, because there's space to sort of fit that and then maybe have an O-ring or something. Not quite sure at the moment, so I'll have a think about that. In the meantime, I'm going to try and remove some of this glue from the plastic just by sort of carefully scraping and picking it away and see how much of that I can remove. It may be I can soak this in water overnight. Sometimes that removes old glue, but this feels pretty solid, so I'm not too hopeful on that. I'm not quite sure what the glue is, but yeah, it still feels pretty solid, so I think picking it away might be the only option. So let's try and tidy those up, and then we'll see about constructing a new T-bar piece. Right, I feel I'm getting somewhere. This was one of the legs which was particularly glued up, and you can see I've got most of the glue off now. It's just a case of carefully picking it away. I'm using a knife here just to carefully pick it away, and then I'm using some 1000 grit sandpaper just to take any of the sort of leftover pieces off. It's never going to be perfect, but we can get, you know, I would say sort of 90% of it off and make it look pretty reasonable once it's all put back together. So you can see I've done the front part of the torso and that leg, and I think that's already looking a whole load better. So I've still got a lot more to do. There's still bits of sticky tape on this. You can see that on the front of the pelvis there is just sticky. It's yeah, it's just part of the sort of glue from sticky tape. So once I've got most of the glue off, I'll then give these a thorough wash as well, and I'll sort of wipe down with some lighter fluid. But I'm certainly feeling that this is now salvageable. That's looking a whole lot better. So I've still got to get all of the glue off this piece here. I think the rest of that leg was fine. And then this is a pretty bad piece. This is the back of the body. You can see there's glue inside all of those joints. So I'm just going to try and pick that out. Luckily it will all be hidden once it's all put together, but I want to try and get as much glue out as I can. But yeah, I certainly feel like I'm getting somewhere with this. Once that's done, I've then got to remove this piece, which again has still been glued in place just a bit. It might be that that comes out just with a twist of a knife. Oh yeah, that is actually going to come out. So there we go. And that's the piece we've got to remake. So yeah, I feel like I'm getting there. It'd be good if this was made out of a styrene and I could just replace the bottom part. So I'll test that with some plastic weld to see if it melts, and if it does, then that will save me a bit of a job. But let's remove the last bits of this glue, and then we can start reconstructing this toy. Well, it's now about half an hour later, and I've done an awful lot of cleaning on these pieces, and I'm pretty happy with how they've turned out. I've just put the legs back together so I can test them on the body and see sort of how much glue is showing. And I think it's a minimal amount now. You can see there's a little bit of glue on the inside of the sort of hip joints, but that will all be hidden by the time the legs are in place. So I think that's probably as far as I'm going to go with cleaning this glue off, because every time you sort of scratch a bit of glue off you risk damaging the plastic underneath. So there's a sort of a happy medium of how far you go, and I think that is about as far as I'm going to get with this. It certainly looks a whole lot better. It's not perfect, but by the time these are on display, all of the glue that's left, which is mainly inside these sort of hip joints as I showed you, is going to be hidden. So I'm happy with that. Now we've got to try and work out how to reconnect these legs to this figure. Now we come on to the legs, which have proved to be quite interesting now that I've taken everything apart. So if we look at Mark's legs on the left, I've taken them apart, and that is the piece that they are fitted to. So you can see we've got a hole in the middle which hooks onto the middle sort of part of the body section, and then we've got two ball joints that go into the legs. Those are very similar to G.I. Joe, so you hook a piece onto the ball like that, and then that attaches to the rest of the leg and it's screwed together, and you get a nice sort of free movement. There's a slight difference between the two legs though. I can see here, this is the Mark leg. You can see there's a sort of an indentation, a circular indentation where that ball nicely fits into there, and on Tiny's legs it doesn't have that. It's got a sort of flat area. So there was obviously a different fitting, but we don't have the rest of that fitting, so I've just got to make something up. And my initial thought, as I said, was to use maybe some G.I. Joe T-bars. So I have some G.I. Joe T-bars here, and I've just done a quick test fit, and it's actually going to work quite well. We will have to modify the inside of the body to get this to fit, but it does fit the legs, which is quite interesting. So if I put that on there, and then hook that leg on there, you can see we get a nice bit of movement. It's a bit loose because the ball on the end is a little bit small, but that's easy to fix. I've just started doing that on this one by putting some super glue on it, and then putting that super glue into some baking soda, and it goes instantly rock hard, and you can then start shaping it. So I've started shaping it and making it a little bit flatter on one end and sort of rounded and just slightly larger. So that is my modified G.I. Joe T-bar. And you can see I can try that into this leg here. So that fits on like so, and then we can fit that piece on like that, and that is going to fit really well. It's going to form a very nice fitting, but it won't fit inside the body. We will have to modify that slightly. I'm going to have to remove that little peg there, and then we'll put an O-ring that goes over this middle post, and that will hold it in place. And I think there's just about enough space to get that all inside the body, and the body attached back together. So I'm just going to continue modifying this G.I. Joe T-bar. I've got to sand down a bit more of this super glue just to shape it, because it's not quite right. It's a very sort of tight fit on this leg, so I've got to do a little bit more modification. But I think it's going to work. So it's not going to be quite original, and I am going to have to modify the inside of the body slightly, but it will get the legs back on. This plastic I did just try with Plastic World, and it doesn't work. This is a more nylon-y plastic, so I could try and make something out of styrene sheet, but I don't think it would be strong enough. I think these G.I. Joe T-bars are a far better solution. So let me carry on modifying this one, and then we'll try and get this all fitted back together.
Toy-polloi. That is incorrect. Try again.
After a fair bit more filing and fine-tuning, I've now got this, which I think will do the job sort of pretty much perfectly. So I've actually bent the little hook part around. On G.I. Joe's they are angled like that, so I bent that to be flat, and as you can see this is just super glue with baking soda, and then I've filed it to make these little discs. The other one, as I showed you, had ball joints, but this one appears to require disc joints, and they seem to fit quite nicely. So we can now put this together. So this is the left leg, so that one hooks in there like that, and you can see that clips on there. And I've got one tiny screw to put in the hole there, so let's grab one of the screws, put that together, and we'll see if this actually works. As this is a fix I've never done before, I'm essentially sort of making it up as I go along, and I'm feeling that this is quite a good solution. It's not perfect, but it's going to work. Oh yeah, that leg is on nicely and rotates pretty well. You can't rotate it out. Oh, you can actually rotate it out. That's interesting. It does have a bit of give. So yeah, that's working quite well. Let's put this other leg on, and we'll screw that one together and see how well this one works. It sort of feels a bit odd putting a G.I. Joe T-bar into this figure, but I can't see any other option. Trying to make that piece out of styrene I don't think will be strong enough, whereas this T-bar is going to be really strong. Yeah, that feels good actually. they've got a lot of movement. So now we've just got to fix this into the body. So where is the front section? That's the front section. So if I put this on like that, you can see that we're going to have to modify that slightly. I think if I cut away that little post, it feels a shame to cut that post away, but then this can rise up a bit, and we'll put an O-ring around that middle section, and then that should hold the legs in place. So I'm going to have to sacrifice that post. We'll just cut that off with a pair of plastic nippers and then try and put this together, but certainly that feels pretty good. There we go, that's that removed, and there should be enough space now, which there is. So if I get an O-ring, we'll try and put this together. So here's an O-ring, hook that over there, hook that over that post in the middle. I'm not going to put the arms on for the moment because I just want to test that this actually fits together, because you can see the O-ring does make this section a little bit thicker, but I'm hoping the O-ring will squidge down enough that we can screw that together. Yeah, that doesn't feel too bad. Let's screw that together and we'll just test it, and we can put this figure back together fully and see how it works. Yeah, that's not too bad at all. You can see the legs are on and you can actually move them. It's a little bit sort of squidged apart there at the side, so maybe I'll see if a bit of elastic may work better than an O-ring, just a small little loop of elastic. But that does work, and those legs are now on pretty reasonably. Yeah, I'm going to replace that O-ring just with a small loop of thin elastic, but that certainly works well, and we can get that figure back together, and he's going to stand up and be displayable. I've made myself a little loop out of this 1mm thick elastic, and I think this is going to work better. It's just a bit thinner and shouldn't take up so much space inside the body of Tiny, and hopefully then it will mean that the body, when put together, will stay nice and flush. So we can just hook that back over. Yeah, I think that's better. It's still got the same sort of stretch on it, but it's just that little bit thinner. So we can now put this figure together. I've already put the cape back on Tiny's head, and I have already as well scanned in this cape, so we can go and make a cape for Mark afterwards. But let's get this all put together. So put the back on like that, and then I'm going to carefully pop his head in and sort of rotate everything around, make sure that it's all in the right position. His cape is fairly delicate at that point. It's a fairly thin design on the top of it, so I don't want to tear it at all. So let's get that like that and screw him back together. I think this should work. His legs are all fixed. Hopefully his body will go flush, which it is. So I can tighten that screw up. Yeah, that's looking good. So his legs are now back on and we can pose them. Yeah, I'm very happy with how that has turned out. You can see there's still a little bit of glue residue around, but the overall effect is considerably better than how it started out, and he is now fixed. I also took the time just to remove, there was a bit of sort of over paint on his face, a little black splodge, so I've just taken that off. Basically I've carefully scratched that away. The paint's not very firmly held on, so just a gentle bit of scratching and it pops off. So there you go. That is the Tiny figure all back together. We can now take the scan that I've done of his cape and make a pattern so that we can put that onto the Mark figure. Using the scan of Tiny's cape, I've been able to make a new pattern that we can use to create Mark's cape, and I've been doing a little bit of research on these figures to see what size the capes are and if they're sort of different between figures, and it does appear that both Mark, Jason and Tiny all use the same capes, and that Princess and Keop have different sized capes. So at some point maybe I'll be able to find those as well, and I'll do patterns for those, but for the moment the pattern I have created is just going to be for the larger male figures. And while doing that research, I found a pretty good image of all 5 of these figures, and it turns out that the hat I have here is not actually Tiny's hat. This is Jason's hat. You can see that it's got a more sort of a beaky front to it, so this is not the correct hat, but for the moment I'll leave it on the Tiny figure as that's how it came. At some point maybe I will find accessories for these. I very much doubt it. They're supposed to have guns as well, but you know, those sorts of things tend to get lost and are very hard to find, so I'm just happy to have these 2 figures at the moment. So I printed out that pattern. Here it is on some plain paper, and on the back of that I have stuck some double-sided tape. So I just need to cut this out, and I'm then going to stick it onto some white vinyl. I don't have a material that's exactly the same as this. It's got quite a pattern to it, but this white vinyl should do a pretty reasonable job. And this has just come from a blow-up beach toy. In fact, I have the rest of the blow-up beach toy here. I think it might have been a ghost at one point. I can't exactly remember what it was that I bought, but you can see there's a face printed on there. So just a piece of white vinyl from a blow-up beach toy. and I should end up with a cape that looks pretty reasonable. So let's get cutting, and we'll put it on the Mark figure and see how it looks. That's turned out pretty reasonable. It's got a slightly sort of duller side and a slightly shinier side. So I'm going to put the shinier side on the inside and the duller side on the outside. I think that will look best. All we've got to do is put the head through the two holes at the top. Now I've cut these holes fairly small because it looked like on the original one the holes are fairly small. And you basically fold them on top of each other. Maybe I need to cut that a little bit longer. You put them on top of each other like that and then push the neck post through. So it's going to be a fairly sort of fiddly job. I can see why those capes are often missing, because this sort of forms a lot of easily teared parts on this tiny cape. So I think I can see why that has previously got lost. It's just torn away. So let's try this. If I can put this through that tiny hole without tearing it. Oh yeah, that's gone on all right. So we can now put that through the other hole, and then we'll get the sort of cape shape that is produced by this rather sort of simple design, but it produces a sort of at least a curved cape on the back, not just a cape that lies flat on the figure. So like that. Yeah, you can see those folded over edges. Just give it a slight curve so it hangs over the back of the figure. So let's put this onto the toy and try and get it all connected and put back together. Just get the one screw on the back again. The awkward bit is not getting the cape caught in between the two body sections. I think that's right. Okay, so let's screw this together and then we can look at what the figure looks like complete. So there we go, that's it put back together, and it's not a perfect match just because the material's wrong, but the overall shape and everything else works really nicely. So if you need to do this for your own figures, I will put this pattern available on toy-polloi.com and you can download it for free from there. This is only for the 3 male figures, the larger male figures. If I get the other ones, as I said, I will make patterns for those, but for now that's looking pretty reasonable. I am actually going to paint the hair on these figures because it really does sort of look a bit rough and ready. The rest of the figure, the wear and tear on that paint isn't too bad, but on Mark's head here it really is quite distracting. So I'm just going to get some paint out and give that a quick touch up. I think I will do Tiny's as well, or oh no, Tiny's is actually right, I guess, because he's had the hat on the whole time. That's not too bad. So let's just do Mark's head. I'm going to be using some black acrylic paint. I'll paint that over and then I'm going to put a gloss finish on because it looks like it should be a very shiny gloss. So yeah, I'll put a gloss top coat on, a black undercoat and then a gloss top coat to get that sort of same finish that we have there. And so here we go. Here are the two figures back up and ready for display. On Tiny, obviously we've repaired his legs, and I think that T-bar fix using the G.I. Joe T-bar has worked remarkably well, considering there's no way of sort of actually getting replacement parts for these figures. Sometimes you have to just sort of make stuff up as you go along, and the T-bar has worked really well. So that figure is now ready for display. And then of course on Mark, we've had to paint a little bit on his hair, but you can see that has worked very nicely as well. So we've got a nice shine to it, nice gloss finish. And then we've made the new cape as well, so that matches pretty closely to how the original one would have looked. It's a little bit shinier, but it doesn't really matter when you've got them displayed together. At some point it would be quite nice to find some accessories for these, but as these are particularly rare here in the UK, I don't think I'm ever going to actually get those. Maybe I will find the rest of the 5 figures, but for now just having 2 of these is really nice, and they're going to sit very nicely with the rest of my Gatchaman and Battle of the Planets collection. So I do need to say a massive thank you again to Evander, who very kindly sent these over from France. They are really something unique to me here, so thanks again for doing that. And if you want to check out the unboxing of the bits that he sent me, then head on over to my second channel, toy-polloi 2, and check out the videos there. There's a whole load of videos, a whole load of unboxing, so do make sure to subscribe there. And if you've enjoyed this video, why not hit the subscribe button here on toy-polloi and tap the bell to be notified each time I upload a new video. And thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching toy-polloi. Subscribe for more great videos. You can also follow toy-polloi on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram.